Good?
Good to go.
Karl Marx and Frederick Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto in the winter of December of 1847 and January of 1848 at the behest of the, I don't recall exactly what it was called, but it was a communist party in Europe. They were in their 20s when they wrote it, and this was right before the revolutions of 1848. And that's just to give a little bit of a historical background of the two authors. But to begin, Karl Marx and Engels, they described that there's a specter haunting Europe, and it's the specter of communism, which is this boogeyman that everybody's afraid of. And their aims in the manifesto is to dispel any misconceptions and make it clear the exact points of the Communist Party and of communists. And the first section, it's divided into 4 sections, each describing a different aspect. The first section describes the relation of bourgeois and proletarians, which in more contemporary terms are the capitalists and the working class, or the owners and the working class, owners of the factories, vast majority of property. And they begin by giving a historical outline of the capitalist class. And it descended from feudalism, which was basically kings and monarchs ruled everything, and under them there were lords that owned the land, and serfs that worked the land. And as feudalism was falling in the French Revolution and just throughout, the bourgeois basically seized control of production, taking it from the guilds that were the previous producers, and they organized it into kind of an assembly, very disassociative kind of assembly style manufacturing system. They then began to develop factories, further develop them, increase technology, began using steam powered machinery. But the most significant thing about the capitalists is that they simplified all of the class relations. So there were no longer multiple guilds, there were no longer multiple serfs and lords. It simplified the class struggles into the two camps, the capitalists and the workers. And they used colonialism and imperialism to drive growth. This was facilitated by the discovery and opening of new markets in the Americas, in the East Indies, and China. And the capitalist class grows in proportion to advances in the market and advances in production. And by seizing control, they destroyed all of the previous relations of trade for the relationship of profit. It became their sole motive. This becomes modern industry, which is sort of a globalized market at its earliest form, and it has since grown and become what it is today. One of the most interesting things about capitalism is that it generates its own destruction through overproduction and exploitation of the working class. Overproduction, just in the drive to create more profit, they produce more to meet quotas, to prove growth, and eventually create so much excess that they've wasted and squandered all the materials, and now there's products that no one can use and bankrupt themselves essentially. But the other great flaw in capitalism is that it generates the proletariat, specifically the revolutionary proletariat, the working class, that has been so far exploited that they need to overthrow capitalism. Characteristics of the proletariat is they live only as long as they can find work, because the only thing that have a value is their labor power. And with the development of machinery and production, they become part of the machines, and the sort of romance of working becomes simplified as the worker becomes an appendage, merely an overseer of a machine, mentally disengaged from their work. Capitalism generates, it breaks down the barriers between men and women, essentially, where men and women become equally qualified to observe a machine. And the only difference between men and women under capitalism is that there are just different types of commodities, one more expensive than the other, or and they're evaluated as commodities and not as people. Other ways the proletariat are exploited, the working class are exploited, is that other elements of the capitalist classes, like landlords and like chiefly the biggest example is landlords that take the wages that the proletariat, that the working class earns as part of staying alive. And capitalism also destroys small business, mom and pop establishments, because the mom and pop establishments can't compete on the large scale that the capitalists can. But the proletariat, the working class, they advance their struggle against the capitalist classes, and this is shown in several phases. First, their initial reaction is to destroy the machines and destroy competing products, which really is by and large ineffectual, because they're not confronting the root of the problem. In the second phase, the working class are so demoralized that they begin to they become the divisions between the working class become invisible, they dissolve. So unions can begin to form, and that's necessary to maintain the survival of the working class. And the third phase, the thing about unions is that the victory is not the success of the union itself, but the further organization of the working class. So unions are not unions under the capitalist. Unions under capitalism is not the end goal. It's just a measure of the success of the organization of the proletariat. And the third step is the proletariat, the working class, they begin to form as a class. And they fight for their class interests. And then they will also begin to form a political party and begin to make political demands. Now, the position of the working class in this capitalist structure is that the working class are without property. They have no way to produce anything, and by property it's meant machines, tools used for production. They have no way to generate profit anywhere near the scale of the capitalists. The bourgeois, when they fought against the capitalists, when they fought against the feudalists, their revolution, they essentially sieged the feudalists, the monarchs' means of appropriation of ways of taking production, and the capitalists made it their own. But because the working class have no way to appropriate like that, they have to completely reinvent any sort of means of appropriation. They can't use the capitalist system to fight the capitalists. They have to abolish the system to fight the capitalists. And the nature of the struggle is that the proletariat, the working class, they're the vast majority, and each country, each nation needs to have its own working class overthrow its own bourgeois. And the biggest I guess detriment the working class faces is that as capitalism expands, it will degrade the worker so that they can't even continue a slavish existence. And once it reaches that point, revolution is inevitable. When the capitalists can't even keep their workers alive, then the workers will undoubtedly revolt, or the workers will die and capitalism will fail. So those are the two ways that capitalism is due to fail. Either by its own overthrow, or it will eat itself to death. And then the necessity of labor, of things like building schools and roads, should create greater. It creates connections between the workers. So a worker will have solidarity with his comrade before it will have solidarity with a capitalist, and that is the greatest that will bring the greatest destruction of the capitalist. Is through solidarity of the workers. The second section of the manifesto is the distinction between the working class and communists, sort of the role of communists in today's society. Communists don't have any separate interests beyond the worker and the workers' rights and the workers' parties. The main task of the communist is to bring the concerns of the working class, the international working class, to the forefront of the political scene. And communists represent the working class movement as a whole, instead of individual moments in the revolution, in the struggle, I guess. And the great advantage, if you want to call it that, of communists over the proletariat is not like a leverage advantage. It's just we know the line of march. We're aware of how the fight is going to be fought. We have the ability to organize the great mass and make it more effective. And one of the greatest criticisms that communists get is that we seek to abolish private property. And that's only true if you define property as the means of production, as the factories, because proletariat, we don't have property. Wage labor doesn't generate property for the worker, but it generates capital for the capitalist. And this capital is not private property, but it's a social power, it's a social property. And that's why that's why we have to remove capital from the question in our society and make it a worker state of sorts. That's the term we want to use. And the role of the worker under capitalism is that, again, it creates capital for the capitalist, but under communism, the means of production, capital, quote unquote, it'll serve to help human lives instead of 10 workers' money going into one capitalist pocket, to 11 workers' work will go into the betterment of all that need it. And there is there's a rumor that communists seek to abolish aspects of society like freedom, and the only freedom that needs to be abolished is the freedom to buy and sell, is the freedom of free trade. It's the only freedom that we in a capitalist society have, and it's the only freedom that communists seek to abolish. And so essentially it's the freedom abolished is the freedom to be part of the capitalist class. Aspects of culture that we wish to abolish is, or one of the rumors is that communists seek to abolish culture, and they say that once a commune or a socialist society is instated, individuals will cease to exist, and they'll become lazy. Like you'll cease to be a defined human being, and you'll just become a part of the lazy mass. And if that were true, then we would have degenerated already under capitalism, because the ones that work have nothing, the ones that do all the work have nothing, and the ones that have everything do no work. And another part of intellectual culture that will change is that we won't be trained to become a part of the capitalist machine anymore. Like schools and the education systems will be completely redefined to fit better the needs of actual society instead of capitalist society. There's rumors that the communists wish to abolish the family, but the way the family is set up now is a capitalist relation. The communists want to replace the system of exploitation of women, which goes by the dual names of prostitution and marriage. And one of the themes in this is the reserve labor force, referring to women who, under a capitalist society, are expected to stay at home and take care of the house and raise the children, essentially for free, under the guise of being part of this nuclear family. It becomes a money relation and a power relation more than a familial love relation or anything of that sort. Rumor is that the communists want to abolish the countries and nations, but the working class have no country. They're not considered in any aspect of the political strata in this capitalist society. We have no country. We have no reason to be loyal to any current country, unless it is unless it is pro-worker, a communist country. And the communists wish to abolish various philosophies, religions, and ideologies, but the only way that ideologies develop is through consciousness of your material conditions. An example of this would be, to illustrate, when I was a child, I had no idea of what having a phone would be like, but it's become such a vital part of this society that my consciousness has changed. I've become a phone user as phones have become more prevalent. And these are the only ideals that will change. And any sort of religious or sort of eternal idea, they only serve to mask class antagonisms, and so those are the sorts of ideas we wish to abolish. In the manifesto, Karl Marx gives a list of 10 points that would apply to some countries. In this 150th anniversary edition, it's on page 42. I don't know if any of you have it, just to read along. But I'm going to read them out. Point number 1 is the abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Number 2 is a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Number 3 is abolition of all right of inheritance. Number 4 is confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Immigrants, not immigrants. Anyone wishing to leave or rebel against the system will rebel against the communist state, the workers' state, the socialist state. Will be confiscated. Number 5 is centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Point number 6 is centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. So public transportation, forms of communication, telephone lines, internet, etc. Point number 7 is the extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, bringing into cultivation of waste lands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Point number 8 is equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Point number 9 is a combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country, and by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. Better space management, better resources management. Point number 10 is free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, etc., etc. Like education in the forms of trade education or intellectual education, if you plan on going into academia or whatever the case may be, would be integrated with your progression in that field. The nature of, political power is, it's used by one class to suppress another, and that's why the proletariat must form themselves into a class to win the battle against the capitalists, wrest political power from the capitalists, and smash them with it. And in section 3, I think I didn't understand how it would connect, but it gives a brief, in 1848, it gives a brief summary of other communist and socialist parties, and Marx and Engels, they kind of debunk them and prove why they're not revolutionary. And the first one, he splits it up into 3 sections, and the first is reactionary socialism, and that's feudal socialism, which made the criticism of capitalists, and their criticism was that it created the revolutionary working class. And so feudal socialism, they sought to rewind the wheel of history and reestablish a feudal system in which there would be no bourgeois proletariat antagonisms. But it would never, history can never rewind itself, and that's essentially flawed. And the only thing that these feudal socialists did was publish pundits and witticisms to criticize the capitalists. And then there's petty bourgeois socialism, which is small businesses essentially, and capitalism has already destroyed essentially the petit bourgeois, the small business owners, the mom and pop establishments. And then the third under reactionary is German or true socialism, and essentially German philosophers got a hold of French socialist material, like writings and essays and such, and they read the French literature through a German perspective, and at the time Germany had not been relieved of its feudal nature. It had not been, it was not yet a truly capitalist society, and so it was kind of out of focus and obscure. But the second section of these historically ineffective socialist and communist parties was conservative or bourgeois socialism, and it was implementation of a quasi-socialist system through the capitalists' system. So not revolutionary, but gradual without altering any of the fundamental relations of labor and capital. And then the third section was critical utopian socialism and communism, and essentially these were plans that made by people who appealed to everyone, especially the capitalist class. And so these socialists made no they made no distinction, and they basically begged for money to go start these utopian communes. But the fourth section is the position of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. And this is kind of like the rally call, the war call. But I'm going to read a little bit from page 58 in the manifesto, and it's communists fight for the attainment of immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class, but they never cease for a single instant to instill into the working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between bourgeoisie and proletariat. That is the immediate goal. It's always focusing on the next step and how to move towards the next step in liberating the working class, or educating and organizing the working class so that it liberates itself out from under the heel of capitalism. And that's an outline of the book. If we want to open it up to Q&A or open it up to a discussion, we're welcome to do that.
Let's give him a hand. All right, we're rolling.
One thing I think is interesting is like in that final chapter where he talks about all the different kinds of like socialism. I think
It
it's
was actually the third chapter.
well, whatever. Dude, the last thing you touched on.
The last thing we touched on is the gung-ho.
Part 4.
The
relation of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition.
Can I actually?
Yeah. But I was like, it's kind of interesting that like basically all of those different kind of tendencies still exist. I mean, to see like the bourgeois socialism, one you can look no further than Jeff Torleinen.
Reformism, basic reformism.
One of the things I forgot to touch on was under feudal capitalism.
Feudal socialism?
Yeah, that'd be one.
Yeah, it's kind of like primitivism. It's not a sophisticated primitivism.
It talked about
I would say the only similarity it has with primitivism is the idea of going back to something. But of course, it does not like want to keep the feudal relations in place.
Right.
It's more like agrarian peasant socialism, like that existed in the USSR. And then of course like utopian socialism, people that want to go and on communes.
Yeah.
I don't think that exists anymore, but like.
No, it does.
Oh no, it definitely
I think it
does.
absolutely does.
I guess that was a joke.
Oh.
Oh, I was like,
No! That irony went way over my head.
yeah.
I was just like,
Sarcasm.
Yeah.
sarcasm.
Irony's good.
Man.
But Kai, what did you not
really
touch on?
bad.
it's something that I think is greatly applicable in our locale, considering all the alias people. You talked about clerical socialism, and then, if you're not familiar, one of the core tenets, one of like the deepest principles laid out in the Doctrine and Covenants of the Mormons is they have this divine order, which is essentially, or united order, divine united order, which is essentially, it's communistic in nature, but there's a God at the top of it. And I've heard it said by Mormons that are sympathetic with communism, which is awesome, but it talks about, Marx talked about this clerical Christian socialism as just a form of easing the capitalists' consciences about it. It's not actually revolutionary. It's just like oh look, we're Christians. We have this. We believe in this when the time is right. But for now, we're going to make money.
I think that there's definitely been reactionary tenets in Mormonism and in some Christian sects, but Marx also said that a religious pain is a human pain, a material pain. You know, so it's difficult to always denounce people who are religious as like entirely superstitious. I think that their suffering again reflects a real material suffering. And what I am sympathetic to, and I'm, throw it back at me if you disagree, but what I am sympathetic to church, and most predominantly here, is the fact that they meet once a week to talk about their ideas, even if it is perhaps hegemonic and patriarchal, sexist, homophobic, racist in some core tenets. I think it's, at least in my personal experience, it's really condescending to totally denounce them because they are religious. And hey, there's a lot of like amazing, and you all know, like I'm as militant atheistic as like they come, but I think there's been amazing work done by Michael Minch, who's a liberation theologist, or Will Van Wagner, the Mormon worker, and so I don't know. I think within each particular revolution, it kind of manifests itself differently. Like in the Spanish Civil War, for instance, in 1936, they literally massacred priests. But it was a very popular violence committed by the rest of the, most prominently the CNT, if I'm thinking correctly, because they thought that was oppression. It was out with the old, in with the new, in with the new generation, in with the young, in with the revolutionary change.
Well, I mean, historically, like the Catholic Church in Spain had always been intimately tied up with the state, so that was, it was definitely part of that oppression. And of course, they also sided with the fascists in the war. But anyways.
Yeah, I just to reiterate a point you made, Marx said religion is the soul in a soulless world, right? And so his comment that religion is the opium of the masses, if you actually read that, he's talking about the need for religion in this world of the working class to have these fundamentally wrong ideologies. It's a very material need in order to function within the society, in order to live on, and I think he's correct in that some of that will break down, maybe not all of it, but we should understand it as a contradiction in and of itself. That's a byproduct of the capitalist system. That's my opinion.
Breakdown is in like post-revolution, religion itself will disintegrate. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think
Or at least partially.
Yeah, I don't think there will be these structural religions. I think spirituality and idealism will live on. Not that I advocate for it, but
Well, there's been some points in history when religion was opened up and like heavily supported by certain socialist states, like Stalin. Was it Stalin? Or was it
Lenin
Stalin?
supported
There you go,
religious revolutionaries, not so much Stalin.
Did they not?
During
open up?
World War II was as a matter of generating nationalistic pride.
There you go, there you go. That's what I'm looking for.
Russian Orthodox Church was kind of.
But it's not to say, I think it would be overarching and even misleading to say that religion would entirely disappear.
Was not, they sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I think it would be misleading and too overarching to say religion would entirely disappear. I think we should distinguish from where it would disappear. I would advocate a disappearance from the state level, but within the civil society, which is all of us interacting now, this is civil, it wouldn't. I mean, people are still free to go to their churches and worship as they please, but at least as I understand it, and again I'm speaking subjectively, it would be advocating for a real separation of church and state. That means churches have to pay taxes if they're going to behave like a corporation. And I don't know, I think that would be something hugely revolutionary to what we have now.
I agree that, and this is my view of socialism, but I absolutely agree that people should be able to meet in their religious ideologies even after the revolution if they want to. But I don't see any room for religions owning capital, therefore paying taxes.
Yeah, that's a good qualification, totally.
So, what was I gonna say? Yeah, like I agree, but only with certain religions. There's there's some religions out there that are they're just bad. I'm just gonna throw it out there. Like the Western Borough Baptist Church, like I'm fine with that church just being gotten rid of. Like all the one, like the televangelist people that of course, like they're gonna come out against socialism and they're gonna do so in order to try to protect their own interests.
As far as televangelists go, I think they're more salesmen, that they're actual capitalists.
That's
instead
what I'm
of-
saying.
You can infer that.
Not
And
to
the-
boast the word.
And the difference between them and the Westboroughs is that the Westboro are like extremists, but I'm not familiar exactly with.
I mean, fundamentals.
But I mean,
Well,
like look at
extremely dangerous.
like Pat Robinson and like who's the guy that like called for the assassination of Hugo Chavez? Was that Pat Robinson? Anyways, those guys, they're bastards and they hold sway over a lot of people, and I'm of the opinion that they're probably going to be super counter-revolutionary, and those are just bad religions. I'm just going to throw it out there. Once those guys run, they're bad.
This is taking a turn, but I had to read the manifesto like 4 times before I actually understood it. Does everybody understand the distinction between transitive property and private property? Because I sure as hell didn't. To me, private property sounded like I own a guitar. Communists want to take away my guitar? What? My bike? I love that thing, you know? That sounds awful. Private property, used in this particular context, is, and I think that they should make a qualification. Sometimes when I talk about communism, I do make a qualification. That is private productive property, right? And this is exactly what Kai so aptly touched upon, is that private productive property has an inherent social relation. You have to hire workers to gather your cotton. You have to hire more workers to put the cotton in a mill. You have to hire more workers to make the mill itself, right? You see this sort of interconnectedness with everything. Again, transitive property, because if I didn't make the distinction clear enough, would be like a bike, right? Bikes don't make other bikes, and so necessarily they don't necessarily have such a social impact. That's an incredibly important distinction to make, I think. So, was that okay to clarify? Would it?
No, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Like anyway, I talked to communism with my cousin, and like that just changed everything for him. You know what I mean? Like since then, he's been like so heavily immersed in the communism. You know, I don't know.
I can keep an iPod, I'm in.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, as opposed to the notion of like everyone gets everything or no one's allowed to have nice things.
Wait, so
I mean, it would be mitigated, like things like a house, or if you've got a huge house, you're not allowed to keep your house because it's yours. If you're the only one living there.
Yeah.
I mean, things like shelter and food and water will be essentially on a need basis,
Right.
because they're
Right.
required for human survival, which is the core tenet of communism: human survival versus profit survival.
So question, your guitar, who decides what is something you get to keep? I mean, like a big house obviously is kind of excessive. Like who decides whether or not your guitar is excessive?
Yeah.
Totally. Well, hey, it would be up to the will of the people. I mean, it's sort of an arbitrary question for a hypothetical situation.
Yeah,
You know, however, we should question, well, to answer that, Zach, we should question how the guitar was made, by whom, and the relationship that went into it, you know what I'm saying?
So are you saying like if you build the guitar yourself, you can keep it?
Well,
No, perhaps. Well, the other.
If you worked at all to compensate anyone for the guitar, the guitar should be yours. Like I was going to use that same example because Brett and I are on the same page here. Like my guitar is necessary for my comfortability.
Well, I mean, our guitar's scarce. So that
Yeah.
could be a problem.
I guess if this-
Guitars are scarce.
Well,
You can go into Walmart.
wait, let's keep it more organized. Everyone take turns.
Sorry.
mean, it's like, if you open it up and you say, okay, we have guitars, I don't imagine there's gonna be a lot of guitar manufacturing in the immediate aftermath of the revolution. But
The revolution, as you're saying, is again hypothetical. So hypothetically, it might not be guitar
It
production.
might be a rock and roll revolution.
It might be a rock and roll.
Well, I never like to sway from like using concrete examples. We could use historical examples of like, well, if it came down to it, would free healthcare and food and housing and free education precede whether or not you get a guitar? You know, I would be called a radical for saying yes. You know, and socialism, the very definition of socialism is dissecting or evaluating and emphasizing the use value in products and disregarding or devaluating the exchange value within products. You know what I'm saying? Again, Marx's whole argument is that we drink a cup, or we use a cup because it has an intrinsic use, right? We have more use for a cup than we do for like a Furby or like a fuck Barbie doll or something. You know, well, that's debatable for some people. You know what I'm saying? But it's the same principle, and it should be based on a very pragmatic, and I would say, in most cases, democratic, you know, curriculum or basis. Excuse me. Just to throw that out
Look,
there.
I think these are all really good things to talk about, but I like to keep in mind that if this is the crucial issue of the day, the how do we divide the iPods, how do we divide the guitars, how do we divide the houses, we've fucking won.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
we will be partying, and that will be great. I think more realistically, our task right now is to think the revolution and think getting to that stage, and having the distinction between transit property and private property is a great place to look. But it would be decided democratically. People would have a say. Communities would be involved, and that, I think that for me suffices. Whereas thinking the actual avenues of revolution seems a much more daunting task personally.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would willingly give up all of my personal possessions for the revolution, including guitars and iPhones and keyboards and books.
What about your
Yeah.
fuck Barbies?
You'd have to wrestle me for it. Old school, we'd oil up.
Yeah,
You beat me.
Then who would need the Barbie after that?
Well, I do think it's important to define terms, especially terms that are so commonly thrown around that are supposed to be introductory material, but I think are most commonly, you know, misunderstood. But getting more back into what Steve is saying, and Kai pointed this out again perfectly. Communists should articulate the views of the working class. You know what I'm saying? A great example is the DREAM Act. We've been throwing this idea around for a long time, whether or not we should support the DREAM Act. Does everybody know what the DREAM Act qualifies?
Military will.
Military is an aspect.
You basically, it's either a young undocumented person can go and,
Be in the military for a while to get their.
or school, they can go to college and that offers them a path to citizenship.
It is a legal path to citizenship for undocumented workers.
They're dying for the country.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully
In
not.
one hand, like our support tentatively would be the RSU as an organization and me personally. The focus is on the education aspect of the DREAM Act. One thing that we are wary of is that the military clause is put there as a trap for, you know, gullible and uninformed youth to be like,
Youth that can't afford to go to
or
college.
you, or that, as just an avenue to restock the military. I mean, under the guise that you're doing your part and you're becoming a citizen. Also, go die for us. You know what I mean? Like it's.
Yeah. Well, the big thing that we were debating about is like. Oh
No,
yeah.
go
Sorry.
ahead.
Well, I have been talking quite a lot. So you can totally take it if you want.
Yeah, my personal take on the DREAM Act, I haven't really had time to talk to these guys about it. But I agreed at the beginning that we shouldn't support it because of that. Since then, I've come to think that this is it might be a mass organization. And it's really important to go where the masses are and meet them where they are. And through doing that, we can influence the movement, and we can get them to think about maybe tentatively not supporting the military portion later, after the DREAM Act has been accomplished. And that's what they're talking about. Like, if this is accomplished, it's a beachhead for amnesty in the United States for illegal immigrants. And that's my perspective. I think it's great.
Read real quickly. Kai actually read this passage, but I was rereading this yesterday, and sometimes this happens with Marx. I get the creepy feeling that he's like talking to me, like it just hits right on the money.
Yeah.
I get that, but within the Book of Mormon.
And that happens. It's one of those texts. It's just, it resonates every time. And we've been having this discussion, and Marx says, again, Kai already read this, the communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class. I think that's very clear. And that immediate aim for illegal immigrants is a avenue from illegal status to legal status. And he follows that, but in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. And he goes on to give great examples that they're not particularly relevant, but in France, the communists allied themselves against so-and-so. However, they reserve the right to take up a critical position in regards to the phrases and illusions traditionally handed down from the Great Revolution. Then he goes on to say in Switzerland, in Germany, in Poland. The point being, communists need to take the line of immediate benefit for people. People need to see immediate results. There's enough bullshit out there. There's enough opinions out there. There's enough people promising things every day to people. That communists need to ally themselves with concrete demands, concrete results, and from that position, take up the right to critique and move for a more sustained, long-term revolutionary project. And I felt that reading that and Kai choosing that critical passage was just perfect for what we're talking about. I need to kill the conversation.
That's very
Yeah, well, that's the same thing that we were talking about, like at lunch, is, well, we wouldn't want to be totally ultra-leftist and not support it and lose this opportunity to win people over to revolution, right? The point of or the goal of a revolutionary should be to fight for revolution, obviously. Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm saying. We wouldn't want to totally disregard on the grounds of like, oh, well, it's bringing in, poor brown people to go and kill poor brown people, which is a great argument, but we don't need to mislead people when we're giving them our spiel on the DREAM Act. We say, yeah, this is totally something that we're fighting for, but always give our qualifications. We wouldn't want to totally withhold the qualifications that are totally relevant. The fact that they're going to die and they're going to be blocking bullets for the rich is totally relevant to them and their situation. So, I don't know, just to shed more light on what we're talking about.
Just the last few minutes, would everyone be interested if we actually went kind of back to what Marx is getting at here? Because right now with the DREAM Act we're sort of applying, which is always awesome, but it'd also be really good to understand the importance of the history that Marx gives. The reason he talks about the development of feudal society into pre-industrial society, into industrial society, and sort of what that actually means. You guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'll throw out my 2 cents. I feel that the reason that's important and the reason it gets developed further in Das Kapital in Section 8, so-called primitive accumulation, I'm always touting that, it's my favorite part. But by demythologizing the history of the development of capitalism, Marx is giving an analysis of how history developed, how it's unnatural. There were laws, regulations, institutions involved with the seizure of private property, the seizure of common property, turning it into private property, and basically creating a working industrial proletariat, forcing them into factories, and creating the means necessary to create industrial capitalism. Often we're given the Adam Smith story, or just the Sean Hannity story, that some people are fucking lazy. We're going to bail them out. Why would we bail them out? I don't want to bail them out. You want to bail them out? Sean Hannity is the worst at that. But that's not the natural story. The natural story is a myth lost to history. The history we do have shows a very different story. And I think that's part of the critical importance of Marx's work is seeing that history develop. It gives us a sense of people in the present that things do change, that things are continually changing. And that for the bourgeois to develop into the dominant, imperialists they are today, that was a process of historical transition and revolution. The bourgeois class had their own revolution to create what they had. And social conditions do change. And what makes us not idealist in saying like revolution, Alex Carliero's talking all this shit and stuff, what makes us not idealist and not just completely bullshit is the fact that we have these historical examples and we're committed to them, we're committed to changing things. And we've seen that things do change in history. It's not this make-believe story that we're telling ourselves. Marx is analyzing the actual progression, showing we can change, things do change.
Yeah, it was just the other day that I was having a conversation with this kid, and he was like, things won't change, and I get that, we run in that a lot, and I said, do you realize the hubris in thinking that things aren't going to change again? Like, I can't guarantee they're going to change how I want them to change, but they're going to change. Like, this system, it's not eternal. Capitalism, I think it's eternal, but dialectical materialism, that's a loaded term, but I think we're verging on it in this conversation, tells us that change is inevitable, that change is constant. And I think once I said that, a switch flipped in his head, and he started thinking about things in a more long-term view, not thinking, about I'm living in 2011, Barack Obama's the president, but I'm living on this continent in this century, and things have changed for so long and will continue to change. And I think it's a critical part of Marxism to be understanding that we are part of that change, and that change is happening.
Well, look at in the last 10 years, I'll be real quick, and I'm kind of dominating a few minutes left, but even capitalism itself has changed in the last 5 years. We've seen a firm commitment from capitalism in the United States to abolish Social Security and any sort of Medicare and welfare. That's a recent change, probably over the last 30 years, you could argue. But since Reagan, it's been getting chipped out away, more and more. But those are real changes under capitalism. Even the capitalism of 50 years ago is different than it is today. And we've seen firm commitment, $700 billion put forward to bail out massive corporations. But we are no longer, or if we ever were, this sort of free market. We're firmly committed to keeping the rights and property of these corporations. We've seen that in the $700 billion bailout. Capitalism is changing. It's getting more desperate. It's making more blatantly offensive maneuvers, too blatantly offensive to us people, saying that we have $700 billion to give companies, but we're shit out of luck over Social Security and your medicine, retirement. There's no room for you as a person, but there's plenty of room for AIG and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and those are major changes. Capitalism is more blatant than ever, and I think that's a concrete example we see just in the development of capitalism.
Is it too late to go into like a fact, an analysis of how that can turn into fascism? Or is that?
I think it would probably be more productive myself to go into overproduction. If you want to.
I actually kind of have a question dealing with that. So you said that capitalism over time will, eventually produce so much that it will run itself out of resources and, eat itself, like you said. So with how things are going in this day and age, what do you think that's going to look like with things like Walmart and, the world dominating things that are going on right now?
I don't have anything really that comes to mind in the present, but in the Great Depression, people were starving to death and looking for work and not being able to find anything because the stock market crashed and everybody jumped ship. All of the corporations jumped ship. There were larger warehouses of grain that could have gone to feed these poor people, but they were burned because this overproduced grain, it was too expensive to ship it out. It wasn't worth the money to ship it out because it wouldn't make any profit. Those sorts of things. It would look like the destruction of this surplus, property, the transitive property, the product, and it would be ultimately detrimental to people because it is not profitable.
Yeah, I brought this up, like going along with what Kai's saying, I brought this up in my lecture last time, but just like they burned grain in the Great Depression today, currently, I just read an article a few weeks ago about how banks are now bulldozing vacant houses in order to force the value back up. Yeah, exactly. Massive foreclosures, people being pushed out of their houses, and their response is not to house people, but to bulldoze houses.
In order to somehow make money.
Well, so
Supply and demand.
Yeah, a lot of stuff.
yeah, so you force.
Decreasing the supply, you increase the demand.
Yes.
But I mean, how many of us have had a hard time getting to work at some point in our life? Me, for one, I've had a hard time getting to work. In the last 10 years, we've seen the auto market crash, and what was the response just in the last 5 years from our government? We fired almost 40,000 employees in the auto industry, and then closed down 3 major automotive plants. And now we have cars, that are now going on sale, they're older models. But how many of us could use cars, and how many of us could still use those sorts of products that instead of being made available to the public, they close down and fire people, and then put those cars in auctions or sell them off overseas? And we see none of that, even though we have, a hard time making our way.
Marx illustrated this under capitalism, because of the capitalists constantly trying to exploit the worker. It'll starve the worker and undermine itself through, if not blatant overproduction, through the inability to support the workers. And firing, how many? 40,000? Something like that?
I think that was just 2 years ago too.
Firing that many
GM
people, putting that many people out of work, putting them on the line of desperation.
Yeah, no, that's just one business. That's not taking account of entire, unemployment rates into account, or underemployment rates. Right, underemployment is you're working but you still don't make enough.
My dad has an architectural license. He is fully certified as a national and state, and he works as a draftsman for roughly $38,000 a year because the architecture market it's really hard to get into, and there are so many in Utah that he's underemployed. He's way overqualified to just be a draftsman, but he's working at that level. That's like professors working as adjuncts or high school teachers, or underemployment can have all sorts of faces.
Should we call it good?
All right, thanks for coming, everybody. Let's give Kai a hand.